All right, good afternoon. Welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farms webinar. Really excited to be here today. Have something a little bit different for you. I guess I'll introduce myself for those that may not be familiar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and been involved with the Learning Farms for a number of years. So excited to get to host many of these webinars. And as I said, we have something a little different today. So we have Kathy Evenson-McDermott, that's with ISU Extension and Outreach, and Sophie Farr, that's with the National Lab of the Rockies. They're going to talk to us today about on-farm energy opportunities, distributed wind. So, Kathy and Sophie, the virtual floor is all yours. As always, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box and we'll get those to you. Somebody said there's an annoying echo. Is everybody else hearing that too? Okay. Okay. No, it might be that somebody's logged in twice and they're getting an echo. Um, all right. We will. So somebody said there's no echo, and it might be that you're logged in twice. Okay. Um, Now the virtual floor is all yours, Sophie and Kathy.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to Iowa Learning Farms. Sophie and I are really excited to be here today to talk to you about distributed wind. All right, so next slide, Sophie. My name is Kathy Evenson-McDermott, as Matt introduced me, and I'm an extension specialist in community and economic development here at Iowa State Extension and Outreach, and I'm working with farmers and landowners on distributed wind energy awareness building and outreach. And with me today is Sophie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie Farr. I'm a researcher at the National Laboratory of the Rockies. My work primarily focuses on distributed wind engagement, outreach, developing materials for audiences who might want to learn more about those opportunities. Excuse me. Our organization is partnering with Iowa State, and Kathy will talk a little bit more about
Okay. Yes, Sophie and I are part of a larger team between the National Lab of the Rockies and Iowa State Extension, collaborating on distributed wind. And so we're partnering to build awareness, provide education, and connect landowners to technical assistance. And we do this through outreach and programming and using the latest technology. And really, it's a wonderful partnership that highlights both of our areas of expertise and that the National Lab is able to develop the materials. They are deeply ingrained in energy work, and Extension Outreach is able to connect with local landowners and farmers on the ground and get that information to them, as well as bring feedback back to the labs. And then labs can provide technical assistance directly to farmers and landowners. So we're excited about the work that is going on. Next slide. So our plan for today is to talk about what is distributed wind energy and to set that in the context of Iowa, talk a little bit about the technology behind wind and some tools that we can all use to determine wind potential, and then technical assistance that's available from the National Lab. Next slide. So, in an attempt to frame what is distributed wind energy, I want to talk just for a moment about probably what most of us see every day driving to and from our daily activities, the large wind turbines that are along the highways here in Iowa. And it's no surprise that Iowa energy is made up of over 60% wind energy. And so what we're seeing is the second half of the slide here, utility scale wind projects, a lot of the time is what most of us are pretty familiar with. And those utility scale wind projects are sending energy to distant end users, that is on the transmission side of the electric grid. And in most cases here, the landowner usually leases their land for utility scale turbines, and these turbines are 1 megawatt or larger. And so that's about what we're going to say today for utility scale, because our energy is really going to be put into distributed wind for our time together. Just wanted to frame that. So distributed wind projects are turbines of any size, but what really, really determines that it's distributed wind is that it's energy produced on site or locally. And so distributed means that the power is produced at the site where it's consumed rather than being sent out or whether at a centralized station. Wind energy that is produced locally and on site primarily is behind the meter for farm, for residential use, for small businesses. There is also front of the meter, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. Excess energy may be sold back to the utility via a process called net metering. And net metering is a mechanism that utilities offer to be able to provide credits towards the energy bill based on this excess energy that's produced. In distributed wind energy turbines, usually the landowner owns the turbine. Next slide. So here we have a little bit of an illustration to help understand how distributed wind energy works in terms of its process. So we see a wind turbine on the left and a little solar panel array behind the barn. And maybe that's helpful to think about behind the meter, right? So it's directly powering that barn or that greenhouse operation or that grain drying operation. And then any excess energy would be sent through the distribution lines to the grid to be able to earn credits on your energy bill that month. The next line is front of the meter. Okay, so in this case, we have the wind turbine and the solar array that is directly feeding into the distribution lines to reach maybe a school campus or maybe a hospital campus that is nearby. And that's the key, again, that it's nearby. It's not being sent out to a distant end user. And then our final illustration is off-grid, and we have a turbine, we have a solar array, and here we actually have battery storage too, that any of these could be powering a remote cabin and not hooked up to the grid, but off-grid. So 3 different ways that distributed wind energy can work. Next slide. So the 3 sizes of wind turbines, it's helpful to look at here. Small wind, when we say small distributed wind, we're talking about usually turbines that are less than 100 kilowatts. And in terms of the turbine height, they can range up to 50 meters. Those are used for homes and farms and small businesses. Our medium size is up to 1,000 kilowatts, and there you see community wind, small agriculture operations, commercial and industrial. And then the large distributed wind actually is, the same size it starts at as utility scale, so that 1 megawatt or greater. And tower heights can be just about 100 meters there. And we would see these with large ag and commercial and industrial applications in some utilities. Next slide. So why distributed wind in Iowa, right? Well, if we take a look at the map here of the US, we see the wind belt outlined. And there is Iowa right in the middle of that wind belt. So it lies in the windiest part of the country. It ranks second in the nation for wind potential, which is the total amount of wind available in a specific region. And I want you to look at the color of the shape of Iowa right now, because we're going to see that a little closer up on the next slide. So you see mostly oranges and yellows, right? And then our neighboring states in terms of who's also pretty high in wind potential, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. It's no coincidence that they're also in the wind belt. So this again provides a little bit of background of how we're seeing this wind potential in the US. Next slide. Okay, so we have the 2 maps of Iowa here, a little close up, and these are showing the wind speeds. And on the left, we have a map that shows a wind speed, the average wind speed in Iowa, with a 50-meter tower height. And what tower height is useful to know is that as your tower height increases, so too does your wind speed. So you're able to access faster wind speeds at taller tower heights. So for a 50-meter tower height, the average wind speed in Iowa is 6.87 meters a second. That translates into 15.4 miles per hour. And at a 100-meter height, that wind speed jumps up to 8.14 meters a second, which is a little over 18 miles an hour. The US average wind speed is 8.31 meters a second at 50 meters and 9.16 at 100 meters. So if you just take a look at the 100-meter height wind speed in Iowa as well as the US average, there isn't an awful lot of difference between them. So I think, it's interesting to know that Iowa's average wind speed at 100 meters height is just under 20 miles an hour. And when you look at the states here, you see on the 50-meter height maybe a little fluctuation. The legend shows that the dark red would be the highest wind speed and the light blue would be the lowest. And Iowa's really kind of right there in the maybe upper two-thirds middle, with orange and yellow. And then on the 100-meter height, you can see it's pretty bright orange, moving into that more of a red color. And you can see that the whole state is really showing good potential. There might be, some small pockets along the edge you can see at the 50-meter height of eastern Iowa that look a little bit green, but in general, you've got pretty good wind height, wind speed in Iowa. Next slide. So, another way to think about this, and this map shows 30-meter height, and so we see more fluctuation there on the map because, again, the height of the tower is lower. But Iowa is served by multiple utilities that offer net metering, so that makes it also beneficial to think about distributed wind in Iowa. Iowa's farms and rural businesses can definitely benefit from decreased energy costs. And this is a way to build energy resilience in utilizing energy in renewable ways. And so just thinking about having a little bit more control over where your energy is coming from is a way to think about that. Okay, next slide. So of our current projects in Iowa right now, we have 502 distributed wind projects, and these have been built since 2003. With a capacity of 225.8 megawatts. For a little bit of context, that figure of 225.8 megawatts represents 20% of distributed wind capacity in the US. 71% of these projects were installed between 2009 and 2012, and that was really the peak period for distributed wind in Iowa. The pie chart on the left shows the total projects. And we can see that 432 of those 502 projects are small projects. And again, small means under 100 kilowatts. And 48 of those are mid-size and 22 of those are large, so larger than 1 megawatt or 1 megawatt or larger. And then the pie chart on the right is showing the distributed wind installed capacity. So 205 megawatts of that 225.8 is coming from large projects. And remember, the large projects were the smallest group, but they supply the bulk of the capacity. 10.1 megawatts is coming from the small projects, and 10.7 megawatts is coming from the mid-size. Next slide. So of the 502 projects, we know that 193 of these projects have a known customer type. 34 of the projects that have utilities as end users have large turbines, and 3 use mid-sized turbines. All the commercial, residential, and industrial projects use small turbines, and the institutional and government projects have small, mid-size, and large installations in Iowa. And I want you to note that the agricultural operations here are 77 of the projects. So that tends to be where we see the greatest usage right now with distributed wind in Iowa. And we're going to detail that down a little bit more on the next slide for agriculture. So of these 77 agriculture projects in Iowa, 72 of these use small turbines with a cumulative installed capacity of 2.5 megawatts, and 5 of these are using large turbines. Of the small projects, 52 of them are using turbines between 10 and 50 kilowatts. So that kind of helps to set the stage for what agricultural usage is looking like in distributed wind in Iowa. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Sophie, and she's going to talk about considerations to think about with technology and technical assistance. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. That was great. So when it comes to thinking about what makes a site suitable for distributed wind, it really depends on that wind speed, which Kathy talked through. Generally, you need at least 4 meters per second at a height of 30 meters to get a sufficient wind resource. And then as for the taller turbines, you need a little bit higher wind speed, but as we learned, the wind speed increases the higher you go, so it works out in a lot of places. Generally also good to have at least 1 acre of land, which is sufficient to meet zoning requirements in a general sense, such as setbacks to property lines or nearby buildings. And then another really important consideration is that you do need to have some sort of open area to site the turbine away from trees or buildings or other tall structures, because that can affect the wind resource, make it a lot more turbulent, which then affects the output of the turbine, the energy output of the turbine. So that's why you see a lot of both distributed wind and large scale wind in Iowa in general, because there's a lot of open areas to site those turbines. Something I did also want to note as well, when you have complex terrain like a lot of hills or mountains or valleys, that can also affect the wind resource and make it more turbulent. So that's why you see a lot of wind in uh, flat agricultural areas, like Iowa has a lot of. So another consideration for distributed wind is that it does have a relatively small footprint, which can make it attractive in a lot of scenarios, such as agricultural scenarios, because it is compatible, can be compatible with grazing or crop production or pollinator planting, as well as providing shade for grazing livestock, some instances. So some of these photos here on the right, the first photo on the left shows someone looking down from this is a utility scale turbine, but as you can see, there is some of that land that is taken out of commission for the base of that turbine. There's also typically access roads that are put into place, but generally there is farming right up to the base of that turbine. And then if you look at the top right, we have an interesting photo. I think those are sheep that are taking advantage of the shade, probably a hot day. So just some interesting uh, characteristics of distributed wind. So when it comes to cost considerations, in 2024, which is the most recent data that we have from another national laboratory that does a market-wide compiling of costs and all sorts of data, and they put that out in an annual market report. But the 2024 data is the most recent data that we have. Average installed cost for new small wind projects was around $6,000 per kilowatt. So that takes into account not just the cost of the equipment, but also the labor cost to install the foundation, the crane to put the turbine up, the transportation, the cost of connecting to the utility, which varies by utility. So just mentioning, good to reiterate that this is a national average, as well as the engineering and design of that turbine and any of those soft costs from interacting with the local government when it comes to zoning or permitting or inspections. So down here we have overall cost for a 15 kilowatt turbine, for instance. There used to be tax credits at the federal level, but those were recently phased out. So if you're interested in looking more at these data, I can share the link to the annual market report that comes out from Pacific Northwest National Lab. So when it comes to learning more about distributed wind, for those that are curious, the lab team at the National Lab of the Rockies and our ag partners at Iowa State Extension help support decision making on distributed wind through technical assistance that helps farmers and other ag stakeholders determine whether this makes sense for them. Not trying to sell anyone anything or push a technology, just offering free information. We do look at things like, can distributed wind support my goals? So for instance, if you want to reduce your electricity bill, or you want, and let's say that it's a hospital campus and you have resilience needs, you need to make sure you have power when the grid is out, can look at distributed wind as part of a hybrid system with battery storage to make sure that there's continual operations for that campus. We also can do some techno-economic analysis and modeling to look at how much energy could a distributed wind system produce at my site with my wind speeds, um, looking at different models of wind turbines, and how does that match up against your energy load, how much energy that you use on an annual basis. And do some more in-depth modeling on costs, and then as well as some modeling on how distributed wind interacts with other technologies of interest, like battery storage, like a backup diesel generator, like agrivoltaics. We do a lot of that modeling at the National Lab. We can also connect folks with others who have installed wind and just generally answer questions. So if you are curious about learning more about this, I have my email here, and we can share that as well afterwards. But feel free to send an email with any types of questions that you might have. So just wanted to talk briefly about some of the tools that we have that we use here at the labs to do some of that modeling and analysis. So there's several free publicly available online resources. This here is called WindWatts, which if you might be familiar with a similar tool on the solar side called PV Watts, also developed by National Lab of the Rockies. Really user-friendly tool to type in your address and look at the wind resource at your site. And I'll do a quick demo of that. But I also did want to mention that we have another tool, or this is not a National Lab tool. I think this tool comes out of Europe somewhere, but Global Wind Atlas does model the wind energy resource at different heights across the whole globe. So kind of fun to play around with that sometimes. But for reference, let's try looking up the Alliant Energy Solar Farm at Iowa State's campus. So I have it typed in to WindWatts here. And a couple things to note. So you can use different turbines. Some of these are reference turbines. Some of them are actual turbine models that you can go out and purchase if you wanted to. There are different heights that you can play around with, but it does kind of tell you like what is the recommended hub height for whatever turbine you selected. You can show the wind speeds in miles per hour or meters per second. We do recommend enabling a loss assumption, which is not ticked on when you first start the program, but it helps to just take into account any losses that come from generation, distribution of that electricity, etc. Gives you a more accurate representation. And then this ensemble model basically compiles all of the models that are out there to give a more accurate output. So let's just use an example of a 15 kilowatt turbine, which is commonly installed in agricultural applications. If we look over here, it tells us the wind speed at this site, the address that we selected, and then the wind resource, which is generally, it'll classify it as low, medium, or high. This wind resource here is above 5 meters per second, which is excellent for wind energy generation. And then it will give you a general production estimate for that turbine at that particular site based on the wind resource. So if you look at the details, it will also give you some averages over the last 10 years in terms of wind speeds and energy output. And then this here is a wind rose, which basically shows what direction the wind is coming from, which can be helpful when it comes to actually siting that turbine. So that's WindWatts. And then Global Wind Atlas, you can see that there's wind resource map for the whole world, and can play around with look at different countries here. And there's somewhere in here you can, oh, down here is what I'm trying to look for. There's different heights for the Global Wind Atlas, and the numbers will slightly change because the wind resource changes depending on what height you're looking at. So those are just some tools that we use. I'll also talk briefly about some other tools that we have. And again, we'll share all of these links with you all after this, but we can also do some techno-economic modeling, which basically just looks at costs and energy output. We have some tools at the lab as well that can do this called System Advisor Model. And then there is a tool out from the Distributed Wind Energy Association called AgWind, which does some similar work. So kind of helpful too, if this is something that you're interested in looking more into, you can play around with these tools. They're all publicly available and kind of compare what's going on. So with that, I'll pass it back off to Kathy if you had any closing words.
Well, we appreciate your attention today. Thank you so much. And I know Matt's going to say a few words about Iowa Learning Farms, and then we'll be back to take your questions. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Sophie and Kathy. Um, and get your questions in. We have some, but I want to thank our key funding partners that make the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series possible. The Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. So this series would not be possible without those great partners that are supporting us. Next slide. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we would greatly appreciate it. You can scan that QR code or you can go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. Only one survey response is needed for all of the 2026 webinars. So if you've done so, thanks very much. And if you're willing, we'd greatly appreciate it. We can go to the next slide. Okay, we're going to go back to our in-person chat, no PowerPoint. And so we have Dr. Shelby Gruss. Shelby is an assistant professor and forage extension specialist with Iowa State University. So this is part of our Beyond the Basics Advanced Cover Crop series. So we're going to be talking kind of all things forage. So tune in next week, or if you know somebody that you think might be interested in that, let them know, because I'll have some questions, but it's always better when there's some audience questions. Okay, last slide should be that this webinar will be archived, as all our others are, and you can go watch that at our Iowa Learning Farms website or on our YouTube channel. That's just for the Iowa Learning Farms webinars. So Sophie and uh, Kathy, thank you so very much. Okay, first question here. So, and I think this would probably be for the Midwest in general, is wind a year-round source, or is it more common to have higher wind in the winter or summer? I guess, in other words, when is wind energy most efficient?
Yeah, so typically wind energy or wind is more windy in the winter
Okay,
and during the nighttime. But that's just a general rule of thumb. It
okay.
depends on where you are. For Iowa specifically, I think that's true, although you all being Iowans, I'm sure you know this already. Um, so interesting pairing that we see a lot is distributed wind turbines with distributed
Okay.
solar, because solar tends to produce the most energy, obviously during the day when the sun is out. But then more in the summer when the days are longer, you have more sunshine. And so they have what's called a complementary generation profile, in that they tend to produce energy at different times of day, different seasonality. So can kind of smooth out your energy load. And there was a question before that about the wind belt.
Yeah, shifting. I was just going to go to that. Yeah, because we talk about precipitation patterns shifting, but that one hit me too. Like, okay, are wind patterns shifting at all?
That's a great question. I I don't know, but I
Okay.
can look and get the answer to that.
Okay.
If I don't know if you're planning to send a follow-up email, Matt.
We'll have a follow-up blog on this. So we always do a follow-up blog, and so we'll try to put all those resources in there. But then if you have something on that on the wind belt, whether it's shifting or not, we can certainly add that in there. So you can let Elena know about that.
Okay.
Um, there was a question about kind of thinking about that the height and that the wind speed does increase as you go, say, from 50 meters to 100. Is it, I guess, economic? Is it still economical to go to that higher height? The wind speed is not that much greater, but I'm assuming, some of the bigger turbines, it's better to have them higher.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this in the case of utility scale wind. The utility scale wind farms have been getting taller and taller, and then the turbine blades themselves have been getting longer and longer, because that allows them to generate more energy, um, take advantage of more of that wind energy. In terms of distributed wind, we're consideration is to kind of match the energy load on site with whatever output the turbine can produce. So in some cases, it might not make sense to make that turbine any taller because you're already producing
Okay.
enough for that farm or the dairy or whatever it may
Yeah.
be.
Okay. There's I guess somebody here had said they've been looking at wind and solar combination with battery backup for farm use, and they have an EV. Is there, do you have some information on kind of decision making for a combo setup at all?
Yeah, Kim, I would encourage you to maybe if you could get like a short summary of what exactly you're looking for. If you want to send me an email, then I can
Okay.
connect you with some of our subject matter experts at the National Lab who
Okay.
can help you out with figuring out what type of configuration works for your site.
Okay. Awesome. We made a connection here. Awesome. This was worth it right there. So, oh, cool. Okay. Can you help explain how net metering works?
Sure. So net metering is a mechanism that allows for excess energy to be sold back to the utility, and there the customer is able to earn credits then on their monthly energy bill. And exactly what that looks like is going to vary by the utility and the
Okay.
interconnection agreement.
Okay. All right. I think that pretty much gets at kind of the ones for distributed wind. Oh, here's somebody. Is there any difference in using the vertical axis turbines?
We've seen that the vertical axis turbines generally are not as reliable as the
Okay.
horizontal
Yes.
axis wind turbines. And I should note that for distributed wind specifically, there is a list of certified turbines, and I
Okay.
can share that as well.
Okay.
But those turbines have gone through third-party standard engineering testing and
Okay.
design to meet certain standards. And I will note there's no vertical axis wind turbines that have gone
Oh,
through that process. So
okay.
it's sort of you, mm, oh, it can be a hit or miss, I would say.
Okay, here's one I have. I'm gonna use my prerogative as a moderator to ask that last one because got me thinking when you talked about not having near large buildings, turbulence. So I saw like the picture with the wind turbine with the hog facility there. Is that facility low enough that it doesn't cause any turbulence problems there?
Yeah, there's
Uh,
about a 30 meter difference that you need to
Okay,
have between
okay,
the blade height and the next tallest object, and then about a
okay,
500 foot circumference.
okay.
Um,
And that'd
and
be like
so
from the bottom of the blade to the,
yeah,
yeah, okay,
yeah.
great.
yeah, thank you, Kathy. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
sorry, I don't mean to keep jumping in with all the
No,
answers
no,
because
no,
I know
no.
you have lots of good
You're the
answers.
technical expert.
Yeah.
Um, Something I also wanted to mention, uh, is that the wind, the direction of the wind also matters. So when we look
Oh,
at,
yeah,
for
yeah. Yep,
example, on wind watts, we can see at the Iowa solar site,
yep,
most of that wind is coming from the south and the northeast. So
yep.
ideally, you wouldn't want to situate a turbine that's like you wouldn't want to have a building to the northeast of your turbine at
Yeah.
this spot because it's going to block all your wind.
Mhm.
But if you had a building that was a little bit closer from this direction, it might
Yeah.
not have as much of an impact. And that's
Okay.
something that when someone, a distributed wind installer, is really looking at your site, they take all of those details into
Okay.
account.
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, like with that site, because right to the east of where that solar is the dairy farm. And so,
Mm.
but that's to the east. It's not to the northwest or southeast of it. So,
Oh,
uh,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Although, it's not that high, but just yeah. Um, so this may be well outside your expertise area, and if so, that's totally fine. But somebody recently saw an article about painted designs on large-scale turbines to reduce avian deaths. Is there any concerns about those for smaller turbines?
Kathy, do you want to take a stab or do you want me to?
I can't say that I've heard about
Okay.
painting, but I will say that generally where turbines are placed is going to be probably where there's already been some kind of land usage already, that may have already interrupted a migratory pattern, i.e. buildings, i.e. uh, cropland. And so the initial incidence is already reduced because that migratory pattern was interrupted. But I haven't actually read that article about painting on
Okay.
turbines. And
Okay.
I'll let Sophie jump in and explain further.
Yeah, I'm not aware of, I have heard at one point that there was experimentation with painting one of the blades for utility scale turbines, but I don't know what effect that had on avian deaths. But yeah, would echo what Kathy said. Uh, yeah.
Okay. And
I think I
oh,
guess I will say we have seen turbines painted as a means of dealing with ice buildup. So
oh,
if they're painted
okay.
black, they absorb more sunlight and more
Mhm.
heat and are less likely to ice up.
Okay, great. So here's kind of an interesting one, thinking about winds and that we've seen these more extreme wind events in recent years. Somebody talked about 131 miles an hour in Highmore, South Dakota. Not much to break it on the landscape in Highmore, South Dakota. I know where that's at. And I guess, is there thoughts within the wind industry about, what we need to design some of these systems for relative to high winds?
Um, I think I would have to do some more looking into
Okay.
this as well, but I
Yeah.
know that we do a lot of research here at National Lab of the Rockies of stress testing
Okay.
different turbine designs. And we do a lot of work with industry in terms of stress testing their specific designs. And part
Okay.
of that is looking at extreme events. Um, but I might have to get look
Yeah.
more into that and see
Okay.
and include that in the follow-up.
Yeah. That
So,
sounds great. That's
so
yeah. Go
Sophie, it
ahead.
might be helpful that we share that, for kind of normal storms, if there are still normal storms anymore, they're the blades are designed to feather and to then shut down and cut out at around 55 miles an hour, and some blades will shut down at a lower speed than that, and so that does help preserve the turbine in that it stops spinning. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
and so that's one of the mechanisms that's designed to protect them. But yes, in a storm with 131 miles an hour, then that's a much different story.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember how some of the utility scale systems fared in the derecho. I should remember that, but
Mm.
6 years ago, I can't remember that long ago. So, yeah. All right, Sophie and Kathy, Thank you so very much. I think we have some great resources, and I really appreciate your time in doing this and putting, letting us know about all these resources. I think many of us, even though I'm not probably in the market for distributed wind, it was great to see some of these resources to better understand, um, where we're seeing wind and kind of how it varies by height. So thank you very much. Again, this webinar will be archived. It'll be on the Iowa Learning Farm site or on our YouTube channel. And I think Sophie and Kathy both had their emails in there. And I think they both indicated that you can reach out to them. Thank you both for all your work in this space and for participating with our webinar series.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending and your great questions.